Hi everyone, welcome back to my series of videos on introductory microeconomics. I design these videos to the best of my ability to explain economics concepts in as plain English as possible. This week's video is concerned with two things: gains from trade and comparative advantage. These are some of the first topics you'll talk about in any introductory microeconomics class, and that's because they're important. The world around us is shaped to a huge degree by comparative advantage, trade, and specialization. Now, before I get into theory and explaining what those words actually mean, humor me by participating in a brief thought experiment. Just for a second, imagine what your life would look like if you were required to personally produce everything you use and consume on a daily basis. If you're like me, you probably don't have a super wide variety of skills. If I had to make everything I use myself, frankly, I'd probably die, either of malnutrition, weather, or perhaps even sheer boredom. I definitely give pretty terrible Christmas gifts at the very least. This hypothetical hellscape is avoided through the magic of gains from trade and specialization, and that's why it's an important topic. Now, the tried and true way of explaining trade is with a very simple model. So let's imagine that you and I are stranded on a desert island together. We're pretty bad at making stuff, so we can only spend our time producing two goods. We can either gather coconuts, or we can hunt the wild pigs that populate the island. Let's start by just considering me for a second. So let's say in one day, I can either collect 10 coconuts, or I can successfully hunt 2 pounds of pork, or I can do some mix of the two. Let me just write that down. We can define my production possibilities frontier, which is a line that gives all the different combinations of coconuts and pork that I can produce on any given day. If I decide to dedicate all my time to hunting, I can hunt 2 pounds of pork. If I'm spending all my time hunting, I'm spending none of it collecting coconuts, so I get 0 coconuts. That's the point right here. What about the opposite case? I spend all of my time gathering coconuts and none of my time hunting. I can collect 10 coconuts, but I get 0 pounds of pork. That's this point right here. My production possibilities frontier, or PPF, is a straight line between these 2 points. Let me draw that. The slope of this line is -1/5. If it's not obvious to you why, I strongly suggest you subscribe to my channel, as I'm going to be putting out a video in the next few weeks on all the math you need for introductory micro. You can also pause this video and go brush up on your y = mx + b. Now, if we don't trade, my PPF is also my consumption possibilities frontier. I can't consume anything I don't produce. All of my options are represented by this simple graph here. I would pick some bundle of pork and coconuts depending on my preferences, which is just what I like, but that's not really important for the moment. What's key here is that I can't consume anything that doesn't lie either on or within my PPF. Now, before we add U to the simple economy I'm building here, what's my opportunity cost for coconuts and pork? If you've watched my video on the 10 principles of economics, you know opportunity cost is defined as the cost of something in terms of what you have to give up to get it, not just in terms of dollars and cents, but also in terms of time, etc. You can see here then that producing 1 pound of pork takes half my time. Since I can produce 10 coconuts a day if all I do is gather coconuts, the cost of a pound of pork is half this, 5 coconuts. I have to forego producing 5 coconuts to get 1 pound of pork. If you want to know what it costs me to get a coconut, you just have to think it through the same way. Collecting a single coconut takes 1/10 of my time. How much pork can I hunt in 1/10 of my time? Well, 2 pounds of pork divided by 10 is 1/5 a pound of pork. This is the cost of a coconut in terms of pork. This is my opportunity cost for a coconut. Now you should notice here that -1/5 was the slope of the PPF. The slope of the PPF, or rather the absolute value of the slope of the PPF, is actually a price. The price of coconuts on the x-axis in terms of pork on the y-axis. The stuff we've just talked about with my PPF is super important for understanding what comes next. If you're confused, don't be afraid to go back and watch that part again. Now let's add you to the simple economy. Now remember, I'm an economist, so I very rarely go outside. Let's imagine that you were in the Scouts, so you're really outdoorsy. You're better at gathering coconuts than I am, and you're also a better hunter. You're better at hunting pork. Let's imagine that in one day, you can either collect 20 coconuts, or you can hunt 5 pounds of pork, or you can do some mix of the two. Let me write that down. Your PPF will therefore look something like this. Notice that you're better at producing both goods than I am. In trade, we call this absolute advantage. You have better technology, meaning your skills, for producing both goods. You have an absolute advantage in coconuts because you gather them faster than I do, and you have an absolute advantage in pork because you can hunt more pigs per day. You're killing it, and I'm probably going to die of starvation. Now we get to the really salient point of this lesson. Even if you are better than I am at producing both goods, we can both consume more by trading with each other than we could consume out of our own production. This is true even if you hold absolute advantage over me in both goods. Now, this may seem a bit crazy, but I can prove it. Before I do, though, we need to calculate your opportunity costs, just like before. For you, because you can hunt 5 pounds of pork in a day and collect 20 coconuts, getting one more unit of pork means you give up 4 coconuts. If you're having a hard time seeing this, go back to how we calculated opportunity costs for me. It's the same idea. Your opportunity cost of pork is 4 coconuts. Similarly, your opportunity cost of a single coconut is a quarter pound of pork. Notice that this again is the slope of your PPF. Let's collect these opportunity costs and compare them. Interesting. Even though you have absolute advantage in both goods, we can see here that my opportunity cost for producing coconuts is actually lower than yours. I only have to give up 1/5 a pound of pork, whereas you have to give up a full quarter pound. Since 1/5 is smaller than 1/4, my opportunity cost for producing coconuts is lower than yours. On the other hand, you have a lower opportunity cost of producing pork. It costs you 4 coconuts to hunt a pound of pork, but it costs me 5. This is why we can both gain from trading. If I only collect coconuts, I can trade you coconuts for pork. Since it costs you a quarter pound of pork to get 1 coconut, you'd be willing to give me any amount of pork less than or equal to a quarter pound to get a coconut, because this is cheaper than you could get coconuts if you just collected them yourself. If we agree to trade my coconuts for your pork for some number between 1/4 pound and 1/5 of a pound, we both get the good we're receiving for cheaper than we would get it making it ourselves. You could also think about this as you producing pork and trading it for my coconuts for some price between 4 and 5 coconuts per pound of pork. It's the same trade, just with prices in terms of a different good. I am collecting coconuts, you are hunting pigs, and we meet to trade. I can now show you in very specific terms what these gains from trade might look like. Let's say we agree that 4.5 of my coconuts can be traded for 1 pound of your pork. This means that if I produce 10 coconuts, I can trade 9 of them for 2 pounds of your pork. I end up with 1 coconut and 2 pounds of pork. Look at my PPF. This is a number outside my PPF. I could not consume this bundle if we didn't trade. I would not have any time to collect coconuts if I wanted 2 pounds of pork. Similarly, you end up with 9 coconuts and 3 pounds of pork. If you produced 3 pounds of pork by yourself, that would leave you with enough time to gather only 8 coconuts. You get an extra coconut by trading just as I do. We both benefit from trading. These coconuts are the gains from trade. The reason we can benefit from trade is an idea called comparative advantage. You'll recall that having absolute advantage in a good means having better technology for producing it. In this case, absolute advantage meant it took you less time to produce a coconut or a pound of pork than it took me to do the same. Comparative advantage, on the other hand, means having the lower opportunity cost in a good relative to the person or people you're trading with. In this example, I had the comparative advantage in coconuts because the cost of a coconut in terms of pork was lower for me than it was for you. You had the comparative advantage in pork along the same lines. We each specialized in the goods for which we hold comparative advantage and then trade to get our desired bundles. This idea, specialization according to comparative advantage, is the foundation of gains from trade. We spend our time producing the thing for which we have the lowest opportunity cost, and then we trade. We specialize in it. Remember that thought experiment from the beginning of the video? One of the reasons I'm able to give Christmas gifts that don't suck is because I specialize. I don't try to make my own shoes, grow my own crops, build my own house, or anything like that. I focus on one skill, sell it to the market, and then trade for all those other things. I am way better off than I would be if I had to produce all that stuff myself. I consume well beyond my personal PPF, and so do you. There's just one other quick thing to remember. For both parties to benefit from trade, the price at which they trade, sometimes called the terms of trade, must fall between their respective opportunity costs. In our example, the price of a pound of pork was 4.5 coconuts because our opportunity costs were 4 and 5 coconuts respectively. Any number between 4 and 5 lets us both benefit. This is just something to remember. So what's the key takeaway from this video? Specialization according to comparative advantage allows for all parties to gain from trade even if one party holds the absolute advantage in all the goods being traded. And that's about it. Feel free to go through the example again, but plug in some different numbers just to convince yourself that I didn't, set up this example to prove my point. I hope that you found this video enlightening. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to respond and explain. If you like this video and you want to ace your econ course this semester, please consider subscribing or dropping a like on my video. It helps my stuff get out to more students like yourself. And as always, thanks for watching.